Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance. And this week we have a new contributor to the Grapevine in the form of Lara Ford, our new team coordinator working on our training side. Welcome, Lara.
Hello, everyone.
Now, you've been with us about a month now, Lara. What are your initial impressions of the local government legal world?
Well, my impressions are that there is so much more going on than I initially thought, especially with regards to the planning world. So many reforms and shifts I can't imagine being in planning right now, such as the streamlining of planning rules, and will it be enough to deliver the government's promised new major projects and 1.5 million homes? I don't know, some food for thought, really.
Well, you've come to the right place if you like a planning law, because there are a lot of changes happening. Now then, Dennis and I usually take a skip through the bulletin from the week before to highlight some of the things going on in the local government sector. So which item did you pick first, Lara?
The Covid Enquiry, Helen. Hard to believe that this is still going on all these years later. The sheer volume of information it has had to work through has been staggering. And of course, it's really important to learn lessons, not least for the government. Criticism following the pandemic was levelled at contracts that were entered into during the time, and the COVID public inquiry has now started 4 weeks of hearing, looking into the purchase and distribution of billions of pounds worth of medical equipment during the pandemic. In total, it's thought that £48 billion was spent on personal protective equipment, the test and trace programme, hospital supplies, and the vaccine rollout.
I'm aware that this has been reported in the BBC, and it states that the inquiry will also look in detail at the use of the so-called VIP lane, which is officially known as the high priority lane to award government contracts. Now, this was introduced in April 2020, and the idea at the time was to treat offers to supply PPE with greater urgency if they came with a recommendation from ministers, MPs, members of the House of Lords, or other senior officials. And at the time, the government said there was a, quote, desperate need to protect health and social care staff. And it was argued that swift action was required to secure PPE.
Yes, and a National Audit Officer report has found that up to the end of July 2020, about 1 in 10 suppliers in high priority were awarded a contract, whilst the figure was less than 1 in 100 for other suppliers. More than that, the UK's proportional use of direct awards is much higher than its peers, mounting to around 78.9% of the total. In Germany, direct awards account for 41%, 17% in France, and 7% in Poland, so a much higher amount than the UK. The UK stands out in terms of the huge total value of all of its COVID contracting. Even the UK's direct awards are higher than the combined total awards, competitive and non-competitive, almost any other European country.
Yes, I think that is quite a staggering statistical amount, and there are lots of questions to ask, and the COVID inquiry is indeed asking those questions. And we will continue to report on this phase of the inquiry as we learn more. Now let's take a return to your favourite subject and the world of planning, Lara. So the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government has told planning authorities and other stakeholders to focus energy and resources on working with the government to deliver the ambition of local plans and minerals and waste plans that are routinely prepared and adopted in 30 months' time. Now, this direction came in the government's formal response to its consultation on plan making reforms. The consultation asked whether respondents agreed with a proposal to set out in policy that planning authorities should adopt their plan at the latest 30 months after the plan preparation process begins. I understand a total of 298 respondents answered that question, and of those, 34%, that's 100, agreed with the proposal, 41% did not agree, so that's more, and 25% were indifferent.
Well, Helen, the government has said that in terms of transitionary arrangements and rollout, noting the feedback received through the consultation, it confirms its intention to make available as much information as possible to plan makers ahead of implementing the new system. This will include a reasonable familiarisation period to enable planning authorities to undertake early preparatory and scoping work ahead of formally commencing plan making. The government states it is also prioritising the delivery of guidance, tools and templates for plan makers based on when these will be needed during the plan preparation period.
Well, the government has said also that it will develop more definitive proposals for a phased rollout of local plans and intends to publish further details in spring 2025. And of course, we're pretty much in spring 2025, so we'll see when those arrive. These proposals will consider the key practical challenges raised through the consultation, whilst reflecting the government's ambitions for rapid progress towards universal plan coverage and the promotion of a more strategic approach to planning. Now, let's take a look at other news. Lara, you've been looking at digital inclusion, I understand.
Yes, that's right. So this is the Digital Inclusion Action Plan. The Department for Science, Innovation and Technology has set out plans for a major boost to digital inclusion efforts around the country. It includes funding for local initiatives targeted to the most digitally excluded groups, including the elderly and low-income households, and partnering with inclusion charity, the Digital Poverty Alliance, to provide laptops to people who are digitally excluded. The plan sets out how charities, local and combined authorities will have access to funding for relevant programs aimed at boosting communities' digital access, skills and confidence in the online world. The funding, it states, will empower mayors and other local leaders to develop local solutions for the most digitally excluded groups in their areas, recognising the challenges they face will be different across the country.
Well, I think digital inclusion is so important, Lara, and it's not just about connectivity in rural areas, which I think is a default position some people adopt when they're thinking about it, but more and more essential services are offered online. Just think about it, with healthcare, education, banking, shopping. Now, in 2023, the Centre for Social Justice estimated that on average, consumers that are not online could pay 25% more for things like home insurance, train travel and food than consumers who are online. And they also found that digitally excluded people of working age are significantly more likely to be unemployed. In fact, that figure stands at 22.1% against the national average of 3.8%.
Yeah, you're right there, Helen, and more needs to be done to reduce the digital skills gap. 3.8 million people in the UK lack the essential digital skills for life, and 7.13 million lack the minimum essential digital skills for work. The department considers it crucial to reduce these figures and for people's digital skills to keep pace with rapid technological advances and the increased digitization of society, public services, and the workplace. The current skills gap has a detrimental impact on employment and economic growth, it says, with nearly a third, which is 32%, of shortage vacancies caused by a lack of digital skills, and half of these involving a lack of basic digital skills, whilst noting that the essential skills needed to participate in both economy and society are also evolving and increasingly include AI, media, and data literacy.
Well, I understand that this document we're referring to is actually acting as a call for evidence on this issue, and it will remain open until 11:55 p.m. on Wednesday, the 9th of April. It's an interesting one with the Labour government. They are increasingly using 11:55 instead of 11:59, so that's just one to watch for anyone who's very last minute trying to submit their response to the government. It's an interesting, and in fact, I've seen other times as well. I've seen 11:45. So just one to pay attention to if you're intending to respond to consultations, etc. Now then, let's take a return to the English Devolution White Paper. We all know it's the big topic of now. So taken from the LGA Bulletin, the Minister for English Devolution, Jim McMahon, has appeared in front of the committee which discussed fiscal devolution, of which the government has heard representations from local areas, but there are currently there's no plans to explore this further at the time. Now, Mr. McMahon reiterated that the government has no intention to postpone any other elections beyond those already announced to accommodate devolution and local government reorganisation. And he went on to note that the Secretary of State, Angela Rayner, has told him it would not be acceptable politically to go beyond this. And of course, secondary legislation that's been laid already only allows for the current situation, which has been publicised and which we know of. For any of those who want the citation, it's the local authorities' changes to years of ordinary elections, England Order 2025, and that's number 137. Now, there were some pretty interesting questions asked.
That's right, Helen. One question on everyone's lips has been about what additional funding will be made available for councils taking on the additional reorganisation, and also the potential additional work for the Local Government Boundary Commission in England.
Well, Jim McMahon did state that he would be alive to any representations that he received, and he said, I'm going to quote him here. There are two aspects, really. One is departmental capacity and making sure that we have the expertise in the department to deploy. That really was the driving force behind the priority programme. And then he went on and said, quote, what I experienced very early on is that there were many conversations about devolution that frankly were going nowhere other than in circles, and that was using a lot of departmental and local authority time and a lot of political capital, as elected members here and in other places wanted to know what on earth was going on.
Yes, and he also said that the reason for the priority programme was to marshal all those resources and capacity. So it was really clear what the government were working to as a priority and what councils needed to marshal at a local level. Where we had local government reorganisation sat alongside it, we would then be clear-eyed on what additional support was going to be required.
Yeah, he also acknowledged that there is an overlap, and the overlap is that this year the government have done a one-year settlement as part of the local government finance settlement, but that they want to move to a multi-year settlement. And he added that there will be naturally a negotiation about how much upfront investment is required to support reorganisation and how much in savings can be taken out at the end of that multi-year settlement as a way of countering some of that. It will be interesting to see how the recent announcements around reorganisation of the civil service and reducing the amount of employees that currently work there, actually how that would impact in relation to the vast amount of work that needs to be undertaken in local government. But of course, local government's only one part of the work that the civil service does. Now, let's move to other news. We often cover the Ombudsman in the Grapevine, and I understand that the Ombudsman has responded to the National Audit Office report on sustainability of local government finances. Lara.
Yes, so council finances are increasingly unsustainable and in need of reform. Public Spending Watchdog has warned of this. In its report on local government finances, the National Audit Office said town halls are becoming more and more preoccupied by frontline services, while preventative measures are getting less cash. Ministers must develop a plan aimed at reforming funding and services, which will address the financial and demand pressures that councils are facing. The Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman has welcomed the report by the National Audit Office, highlighting the precarious nature of local government finances due to increased demand for frontline staff.
Well, Nigel Ellis, who's the Chief Executive, the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, said that, quote, while our investigations focus on injustices resulting from poor practice, not necessarily a direct correlation with the availability of finances, this report's findings clearly chime with what we see. We know councils need to bear in mind reduced budgets when making decisions on services is having an inevitable and significant impact on their provision. And of course, we know this because it used to be the case that local authorities would sit there and look at their discretionary services and think about what they could cut back. And now we're in a position where local authorities are being forced to try and find a way to provide their statutory duties, and it's increasingly difficult. And it's good that the Ombudsman has picked up on this. So Nigel Ellis also said that they're increasingly finding faults that point to problems with systems and processes, and that the Ombudsman is making more recommendations than ever to improve council services beyond remedying the individual situation. And in particular, the National Audit Office cites pressures, and we know this really well, on special education needs, adult social care and housing. And it's no surprise to anyone, these are the three main casework areas from where the Ombudsman's voiced their concerns that whole-scale changes are imperative.
Well, the Audit Office report stated that proposed reforms of the local government finance system have been repeatedly delayed. Some services are showing the strain, and more local authorities are requesting financial support, some due to the increasing costs of delivering essential frontline services such as homelessness and social care. Despite short-term measures to address acute funding shortfalls, there has been insufficient action to address the systematic weaknesses in local government financial sustainability. It also stated, as the government turns its attention to local government reforms, it is essential that this is part of a whole system, cross-government approach to ensure local authorities are financially sustainable and can continue to provide essential services. This approach needs to ensure effective local accountability for the service and financial performance of each local authority, including robust independent assurance.
Yeah, financial sustainability, that's definitely required, Lara. Not sure how it's going to work, but definitely required and should be the ambition. Now, finally from me, let's take a look at the Employment Rights Bill. There was a lot of noise about this at the end of last year, and I think for many people, or for many of our members at least, it probably seems like it's gone a bit quiet if you don't work in that specific field. But actually, we're far further along in respect of it than anyone might imagine. So this is reports that the Treasury has made some noises that it's concerned about the cost of the planned expansion of workers' rights amid fears that employment tribunals, which already face a backlog of about 2 years, will struggle to cope with the increased claims. Now, the government, at the time of writing this, was expected to introduce a series of amendments. I suspect that's already in the process of happening or has happened to the Employment Rights Bill. And one of the ones that's going to be introduced will drop plans to give people the right to switch off outside work hours, which the Sunday Times has reported comes after lobbying from businesses and industry.
Yeah, so I understand the right to switch off was modelled on legislation introduced in France in 2017 and was intended to tackle the always-on work culture by preventing employers from expecting staff to be contactable outside of designated working hours. It is widely reported that the decision has been driven by Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds and Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who fear the measure would impose excessive compliance costs on employers.
Well, concerns that lobbying from business groups may have significantly diluted the bill's impact, because some people are arguing that increased costs for employers, such as the rise in national minimum wage and, of course, national insurance contributions, could stifle recruitment and even lead to redundancies. And others worry that the bill does not go far enough in protecting those who are in unsecure employment, and that's to do with the 0 hours contract element. And the decision to scrap the right to switch off has sparked further criticism, with many commentators citing the risks of employee burnout and disengagement. And according to recent research, only 20% of UK workers felt comfortable refusing after hours work requests, and nearly half reported struggling with blurred boundaries between work and personal life. And that was reported by Bayani HR and Employment Law website.
Well, Helen, I note that dubbed the overtime epidemic, a survey by workforce management organisation ProTime UK found that 38% of employees report that they are less productive when they are obligated or feel obligated to work extra hours, while 29% said that the quality of their work has declined. Employee well-being has suffered as well, with 53% of workers reporting increased stress levels, 41% feeling burnt out, and 25% not taking their holiday leave due to overworking.
Well, other changes to the employment bill also include, and I alluded to this earlier, the fact that there are no longer plans to ban 0-hour contracts. Those that are considered exploitative, apparently, will be provided for. They will be targeted in legislation. I'm not sure, I haven't seen the actual written provisions in that regard, but there's supposed to be a safety net in relation to exploitative contracts. Be interesting to see how that's defined. Probation periods, there was a lot of talk about that. They will also be set at 9 months rather than 6 months, although it's important to note that parental leave, sick leave and protection from unfair dismissal will be granted from the first day of employment. So that's those first day rights that was spoken about a lot when the bill was announced. Additionally, the lower earners limit for statutory sick pay, that's going to be removed, as well as the 3-day waiting period to claim it. And also, new mothers will get stronger protections by making it unlawful to dismiss an employee 6 months after returning from maternity leave. So the bill is currently at its final stages and it's waiting royal assent, so it won't be long. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 8, available on the LLG website now. Next week, Dennis will be back again to discuss the week's roundup. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too.
Thank you for joining me, Lara.